I remember the exact second it happened. The conference room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the soft click of his pen against the glass table. 3 of us sat there, me, him, and the COO who wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. "I just don't see you as leadership material," he said. The words didn't explode. They landed clean. Surgical. Like he'd rehearsed them in the mirror that morning, testing how many ways he could deliver them without raising his voice. He folded his hands on the glass like he was about to explain something sad but necessary to a child. "I built the operational systems he bragged about in every board meeting. I created the training program that developed half the management team sitting outside that room. I'd stayed until midnight fixing his mistakes, reorganizing his poorly planned launches, cleaning up his budget disasters. And he sat there telling me I didn't have what it took to lead. Some people are great executors," he continued, almost gently. "But leadership requires presence. It requires a certain gravitas that not everyone possesses." Presence. Gravitas. I realized something in that moment that changed everything. This decision wasn't made today. It was made weeks ago. Maybe months. He'd already decided I wouldn't advance. He'd already chosen someone else. This meeting was just the official announcement of a verdict delivered in private. The glass door closed behind me as I left that room. And I understood something fundamental about how the world actually works. 8 weeks later, I filed incorporation papers for a company that would directly compete with his. He said I wasn't leadership material. He just created one. I sat in my lawyer's office, reading through the final documents, and something felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. Not angry. Not desperate. Just clear. Crystal clear about what needed to happen next. The papers made it official. Ashland Byrne Consulting was registered. Bank account open. Office space leased in a building just 8 blocks from where he sat in his fancy corner office, probably telling someone else they weren't quite cut out for the top. I thought about calling him. Sending an email. Making some dramatic announcement. But that's what he would do. That's what men like him do. They make noise, create drama, try to control the narrative. I was going to do something different. I was going to build something better and let the market decide what it actually valued. Not his charisma. Not his golf handicap or his ability to dominate a room through sheer volume. But actual competence. Actual systems. Actual results. The filing was dated exactly 8 weeks after that meeting. Not a coincidence. I'd spent those 8 weeks watching. Documenting. Planning. Learning exactly which clients trusted me, which employees felt undervalued, and which systems would collapse the moment I stopped holding them together. He had no idea what was coming. My name is Ashland Byrne. I'm 34 years old, and I'm an operations strategist. I spent 7 years at that company building things from nothing. I created 3 departments from scratch, literally walking in on empty floors and constructing entire operational frameworks that still ran on the systems I designed. I increased company margins by 18% through process optimization. I quietly cleaned up executive mistakes that could have destroyed our reputation with major clients. I wasn't flashy. I never wanted to be. I showed up early, I worked through problems methodically, and I made sure everything just worked. The trains ran on time. The clients stayed happy. The budget didn't explode. I was effective. And that's exactly what threatened him. See, there's a specific type of leader who can't handle people who make the organization actually function without needing credit for it. He needed everyone to see him as the brilliant strategist behind every decision. He needed to be the one in meetings getting praised. He needed people looking at him with admiration. What he didn't need was someone quietly fixing things. Someone whose competence made his incompetence visible by contrast. Someone who didn't need his approval to know they were doing good work. I think he felt that. I think on some level he knew that I was the reason his company worked, and that knowledge made him uncomfortable. So he did what people like him always do, he tried to eliminate the threat by pushing me out. What he didn't understand was that by doing that, he was about to create something far more dangerous than just a quietly competent employee. He was about to create a direct competitor who understood exactly how his business worked and exactly what he did wrong. 2 days after my review, he announced the new VP. It wasn't me. It was a man named Marcus who had been at the company for 3 years. He was confident in that particular way that usually means lack of depth, loud in meetings, quick with opinions, never actually accountable for follow-through. They'd played golf together. I'd seen them laughing about something at company events while I was handling crisis management in the corner. When the announcement came, the room filled with applause. My palms stung from clapping. I remember that specifically. The physical pain of clapping for someone I knew was incompetent. The physical performance of support while something fundamental broke inside me. He stood at the front of the room, hand on Marcus's shoulder, talking about new energy and fresh perspectives and bringing in outside thinking. He never looked at me. Not once. Not even a glance in my direction. That's when I understood something crucial. This wasn't about competence at all. If it had been about who could actually do the job, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. I had 7 years of results. I had client testimonials. I had measurable improvements in every metric that mattered. No. This was about control. This was about surrounding himself with people who would yes to him. People he could manage. People who wouldn't make him feel small through the sheer act of competence. Marcus would do what he said. Marcus would ask for guidance. Marcus would need him. I would never do any of those things. And that's why Marcus got the promotion and I got a line about not having the right presence for leadership. Within a week, I was removed from 2 executive meetings. No need for you on this one, his assistant told me, with the kind of apologetic smile that meant she hated delivering the message. My projects were reassigned for exposure opportunities, just never mine. I started getting invited to fewer planning sessions. My opinion was asked for less frequently. I created a spreadsheet. Project dates. Outcomes. Metrics. Which initiatives I'd built from the ground up. Which ones performed well after I stepped back. I tracked revenue impacts. I documented which of my systems were still running the company even though my name had been removed from them. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being smart. Because I knew what was coming next. The phase-out was textbook. He couldn't fire me outright, that would look bad, and I had too much institutional knowledge. He couldn't demote me directly because he'd have to explain why to the board and to clients who specifically worked with me. So instead, he was going to make my life slowly unbearable until I quit. Then he could claim I left voluntarily. Clean narrative. No legal complications. Just another employee who'd decided to pursue other opportunities. Except I wasn't going to let him control that story. A senior vendor called me directly. Why wasn't I told you're no longer leading the rollout, he asked. His tone was confused, almost upset. We have a contract with you personally on this. Because the client knew me. Because I'd built the entire rollout strategy. Because my name was literally on their purchase order. But internally, I was being phased out. He didn't think I'd notice. He probably thought I'd be too demoralized by the promotion rejection to pay attention to what was happening around me. He thought I'd just slowly fade into irrelevance until I voluntarily left. What he didn't account for was that I was already gone. Mentally, I'd already left the building. I was just documenting the damage he was going to do without me there to prevent it. I was watching him take apart the things I'd built and trying to run them with people who didn't understand them. The mistakes were starting. Small at first. A timeline missed on a project I'd previously managed. A client communication that should have happened but didn't. Efficiency dropping on a process I'd optimized. And each mistake was a nail in his credibility. I sat in my car that night and stared at the steering wheel for 20 minutes. I could have fought. I could have made an appointment with HR. I could have argued my case, pointed out his bias, tried to prove myself again. I'd seen other people do that. They'd usually just end up more frustrated. Or I could do something far more dangerous. I could leave. Not run away. Not quit in anger and burn bridges. But leave strategically. Take everything I'd learned. Take the relationships I'd built. Take my understanding of exactly how his company worked and what made it profitable. And build something better. I'd been thinking about consulting for years anyway. Independent work. Helping companies with operations without dealing with the politics of internal employment. Actually solving problems instead of managing personality conflicts. This was just the catalyst that made me finally do it. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to a lawyer I knew. I need to talk about starting a business. Clean. Legal. No complications. Then I drove home and started making a list of everything I knew about his business that he didn't understand. Everything I'd built that he thought he'd built. Every client relationship that was actually with me, not with the company. That's when I realized something that made me smile despite everything. I was about to become far more threatening than if I'd gotten that promotion. I stopped volunteering ideas. Just stopped. In meetings, I sat quietly and took notes. When problems came up that I would have immediately solved, I said nothing. When timelines started slipping on projects I would have been managing, I let them slip. I stopped correcting mistakes. Stopped saving projects at midnight. Stopped being the person who cushioned everything. I watched. And without that cushion, mistakes started surfacing everywhere. The new VP, Marcus, he struggled. He was good at sounding confident in meetings, but when it came to actual execution, he was lost. Projects that should have been simple became complicated. Deadlines slipped. Client communication got muddled. I said nothing. I just watched and documented and let the company slowly reveal all the weaknesses that my constant work had been hiding. The CEO called an emergency meeting about declining efficiency. He looked at me like he expected me to jump in with solutions. I just sat there. Calm. Professional. Taking notes. He started to ask my opinion on something, then stopped himself. The question died on his lips. Because he'd already decided I wasn't part of his team. He wasn't going to ask for my help now. So he didn't get it. An old client reached out to me by email. "You ever think about consulting independently?" he wrote. "I've got some operational stuff we're struggling with. Could use someone who actually understands what they're doing." I told him I was happy where I was. It was a lie. But it planted a seed. That email meant something crucial. It meant my reputation was separate from the company's. It meant people knew me for my work, not for the company's brand. That was the opposite of what the CEO wanted. He wanted everyone to think the company was successful because of him. I wanted them to know it was successful because of me. And my clients obviously knew which was true. I kept that email in my drafts for 3 days. Just reading it. Reminding myself that I had options. That people valued my work. That the moment I left, there would be people ready to work with me. I replied eventually, "Thanks for thinking of me. Let's talk in a few months. I'm exploring some options." He responded, "Whenever you're ready. We'll be waiting." Those last 3 words meant everything. They meant he wasn't asking if I'd leave. He was asking when. In a quarterly board review, one of the board members asked about declining client retention. The CEO answered confidently. He gave statistics about market conditions and industry challenges. He talked about external factors beyond his control. He sounded very reasonable and prepared. But I saw the numbers. I knew those numbers better than anyone in that room. They were off because I used to protect them. I used to make sure every client relationship stayed healthy. I used to catch small problems before they became big ones. I used to navigate difficult conversations and keep people satisfied even when projects got complicated. Now I didn't. I just let things happen naturally. He glanced at me during that meeting. A quick look. Like he was expecting me to jump in with support. To back up his narrative with my knowledge. To prove that his version of events was correct. I held his eye contact. Then I stayed silent. It was the most powerful thing I'd done in weeks. Not saying anything. Just letting my silence speak. Letting the board wonder why the operations person, the one everyone knew actually ran things, wasn't confirming what he was saying. I saw doubt flicker across his face. He looked away first. That's when I knew the shift was starting. I spoke to a lawyer about a clean exit. No violations. No gray areas. Everything completely legal. Everything controlled. I wanted to make sure that if I left, there would be absolutely no way he could come after me. No way he could claim I'd violated agreements or stolen proprietary information. No way he could attack my character. I wanted to be so clean that even he couldn't find an excuse to make trouble. You can leave any time, the lawyer told me. You're not in a non-compete situation. Your personal relationships with clients aren't property of the company. What you've learned about operations is just professional knowledge. Nothing prevents you from using that to build a business. What if he claims I stole ideas? I asked. Are they his ideas? No. They're mine. Then he has no case. That conversation freed me. I didn't have to sneak around. I didn't have to hide what I was doing. I could leave openly and honestly, and there was nothing he could legally do about it. The only thing he could do was watch as I took everything I'd built and created something better with it. An investor reached out through an old colleague. A quiet coffee meeting. Two people who'd been frustrated with the CEO's direction. They'd invested money in his company, and they watched him make ego-driven decisions that cost them. They saw him choose style over substance. They saw him promote people based on personality instead of capability. They wanted something different. What would you do differently? One of them asked me. For the first time in weeks, I answered honestly. I told them about the systems I'd built. About the margins I could improve. About how I'd run operations if I was actually in charge. About the kind of company I'd create if I had the chance. They leaned forward. I watched their eyes change. Watched them see something in me they hadn't seen before. Or maybe they'd seen it, but the CEO had convinced them it wasn't important. Now they were starting to understand what he'd been too threatened to admit. That I was the one who actually made things work. We'd like to talk more, they said. And just like that, I had capital. I had people willing to fund what I was planning. The CEO had no idea I was having these conversations. No idea that while he was trying to phase me out, I was already being courted by his own investors. I typed the resignation letter carefully. Not angry. Not emotional. Just clear and professional. 2 weeks' notice. Transition willing. No drama. I printed it. Placed it on his desk personally. He scanned it once. His face did something complicated. Confusion first. Then understanding. Then something that looked like panic. "You'll regret walking away from this level," he said. I almost smiled. I already did, I told him. And I left without emotion. Without anger. Without giving him anything to work with. Just a professional transition of someone leaving a job. What I didn't tell him was that I was taking his investors with me. That his clients were already planning to follow. That his vendors knew me better than they knew him. That everything he thought was his was actually just the collection of things I'd built that he'd been taking credit for. The expression on his face as I walked out was worth everything. He finally understood that he'd made a mistake. But it was too late. 8 weeks of planning became 8 days of action. Incorporation papers filed. Office space secured 3 buildings over from his company. Equipment delivered. Systems set up. Infrastructure ready. And then something started happening that he probably never expected. 3 former colleagues reached out to me privately. Not because I asked. I didn't contact anyone still working there. They reached out on their own because they trusted me. Because they wanted to work with someone who actually valued competence. Because they'd watched the company fall apart without me and they knew exactly why. Each message said some version of the same thing: I'm done. I want to work with you instead. I hired all 3. Not just for their skills, but for the message it would send. These weren't random employees. These were people he'd tried to develop. People he'd promoted or trained. And they looked at what he was offering and decided they'd rather take a chance on me. That said something. Clients started calling me at my new office. Not following me. That would have been too aggressive. But asking questions about what I was doing. About delayed projects at my old company. About suddenly declining service. About the instability they'd started noticing without me there to manage things smoothly. I answered professionally. But they could hear it in my voice. Confidence. Stability. The same competence that had been serving them before. "What would it look like if you consulted with us directly?" one of them asked. "What would the costs look like if I worked with your new company?" another asked. I didn't push. I didn't recruit them aggressively. I just answered their questions honestly. I told them about my new company. About the systems I was building. About what I could offer that they weren't getting anymore. They made their own decisions. And their decisions were to switch. We launched officially. Lean. Efficient. Transparent. No bloated ego at the top. No meetings that should have been emails. No personality politics deciding which ideas got implemented. Just systems. The kind I'd always built. But this time without someone else taking the credit or second-guessing the strategy. Our first week, we secured 2 small contracts. By week 3, we'd brought on 4 clients who were jumping ship from my old company. By month 2, we were approaching 6-figure monthly revenue. He had no idea this was happening. Or maybe he did. Maybe he was starting to hear the rumors. Maybe clients were telling him they were exploring other options. Maybe the board was starting to notice that people seemed to be leaving specifically because I was gone. But I wasn't making announcements. I wasn't attacking him publicly. I was just building something better and letting the market make its own decisions about which was more valuable. His charisma and confidence. Or my competence and systems. We won a mid-sized contract that he'd assumed was automatic. It was one of his longest clients. Multi-year relationship. Significant revenue. He'd probably never worried about losing them because the relationship felt permanent. But the relationship was actually with me. When I left, the client suddenly realized they had a choice. They could stay with the company and deal with declining service and lost institutional knowledge. Or they could follow me and get the same quality of work they'd been getting all along. He called the client personally when he found out. Too late. They'd already signed with my company. I heard from my contact there that he'd been angry. Told them they were making a mistake. Suggested they'd regret it. All the things people do when they realize they've lost control of a situation they thought was locked down. It didn't matter. The decision was made. Former coworkers texted me constantly now. He's furious, they'd write. Emergency meetings all day. He's blaming Marcus for not retaining the clients. He's blaming the market. He's blaming everyone except himself. More meetings. Blame shifting. He called my departure disloyal in front of the team. Said I'd betrayed the company that gave me opportunity. But loyalty was never mutual. I'd given 7 years of loyalty. 7 years of midnight work and fixing his mistakes and protecting his reputation. And he'd responded by telling me I wasn't leadership material and replacing me with someone who could barely manage his own calendar. That's not betrayal. That's just me finally realizing what the actual transaction was. I didn't respond to his accusations. Didn't defend myself. Just kept building. The board started asking questions. Revenue dips. Client retention declining. Operational efficiency dropping. Someone finally asked, "Why did Ashlyn leave?" Silence answered. That silence was louder than any explanation he could have given. Because the answer was obvious. I left because I wasn't valued. Because I was pushed out. Because I got tired of being invisible while someone else took credit. And my departure exposed every weakness in the organization that I'd been covering for. He tried to explain it as a natural transition. Said he was bringing in fresh perspectives. Said every organization goes through changes. But the board knew better. The numbers didn't lie. Everything had gotten worse the moment I left. We secured a contract worth more than my entire annual salary at the old company. Single client. Significant project. Exactly the kind of work I'd always wanted to do without having to fight for credit or defend my strategy to someone who didn't understand operations. I hired 2 more people he'd passed over. People he hadn't thought were ready. People who'd expressed frustration about being overlooked. They cried when I offered fair compensation. Actual professional respect. Actual leadership that was about developing people instead of controlling them. That's what leadership actually looked like. Not presence. Not charisma. Just the ability to recognize talent and help people do their best work. The industry whispers changed tone. He was volatile. His company was unstable. His decision-making was erratic. I was steady. My company was growing. My decisions were grounded in logic instead of ego. One investor publicly praised fresh leadership that's bringing actual competence to a bloated market. He knew exactly who that meant. Everyone knew. The CEO would have seen that. Would have known he was being publicly compared and found lacking. And there was nothing he could do about it. Because the comparison wasn't based on what I said about him. It was based on what the market could see for itself. The board initiated a performance review of him. For the first time in his tenure as CEO, he was being formally evaluated. Not in a casual way. In an official way. With metrics and expectations and the potential for actual consequences. I found out through my connections still at the old company. The review was brutal. They were asking hard questions about decision-making. About leadership capability. About whether he was the right person to be running the company. He was facing the exact conversation I'd faced. But instead of being told privately in a conference room, he was being evaluated by a board suddenly very aware that something had gone wrong. He lost 2 key accounts in 1 quarter. Not to my company. Just lost them. Clients who'd decided to work with other firms because the service had declined too much. Because the infrastructure was failing. Because everything I'd been holding together had finally collapsed. The board voted for restructuring. His title shrunk. Chief Strategy Officer instead of CEO. His authority diluted. His decision-making power reduced. He went from being the person running everything to being the person running specific aspects under board oversight. He was no longer the leader of the organization. He was the person reporting to oversight. We hosted our first annual strategy summit. Full room. Confident team. Clear growth metrics showing we'd built something legitimate in just under a year. Clients felt comfortable. Employees felt valued. The systems were working exactly as I'd designed them to work. I stood at the head of the table. Not louder than everyone else. Not crueler than everyone else. Not demanding attention or dominating through personality. Just capable. And no one questioned my presence. Not once. Everyone in that room understood exactly why I was the one leading. Because of what I'd built. Because of the results. Because of how systematically and competently I was managing everything. Not because of charisma. Not because of golf games. Not because of confidence that wasn't backed by actual competence. Just capability. I heard through industry circles that he tells people I was emotional. That I overreacted to being passed over. But the numbers don't lie. He underestimated me. He dismissed me. He labeled me as lacking the intangible quality of presence so he could justify choosing someone less qualified. And in doing that, he removed the only person actually holding his weaknesses together. He said I wasn't leadership material. He was right. I wasn't built to lead his company. I was built to build my own. And that's exactly what I did. Kindly like, share, and subscribe if this thrilled you for more intriguing stories. The end.